Enthusiasm for the Soviet model had faded. His economic objectives never took off. With his idea of a new socialist man, he was considered utopian. He no longer felt indispensable in Cuba. Guevara felt that the need to return to the battlefield of the worldwide revolution was stronger than ever. On December 11th, 1964, the Cuban revolutionary was in New York, representing Cuba at the United Nations General Assembly. Cuban exiles welcomed him with extremely violent protests. Guevara had arrived to announce another campaign of revolutionary battles, and the tenor of his words left no doubts.
La esperanza de un mundo mejor, la imagen por la cual vale la pena arriesgar la vida, sacrificarse hasta la muerte en los campos de batalla de todos los continentes del mundo.
February 25th, 1965. In Algiers, he spoke about the Third World. He made a very harsh speech. He accused socialist superpowers, China and the Soviet Union, of applying principles of capitalism in commercial dealings with developing countries. It was his last public speech.
Vive l'armée nationale populaire. Venceremos.
The development of countries that are at the beginning of their path to liberation must be paid for by socialist countries. Socialism cannot exist without a new fraternal attitude towards humanity. Che was no longer under any illusions. His great challenge was underway. Fiercely determined, he set out to show the world what proletarian internationalism really was. In Cuba, his life seemed to continue as before. Few knew that he was about to leave and that he might never return. In the meantime, Fidel Castro adopted a cautious stance. In public, he talked of pacific coexistence, while in private he said if Che could plant the revolutionary flag somewhere else, he'd leave him free to act. Guevara left several farewell letters. One of these was for Fidel.
Reclaman el concurso de mis modestos esfuerzos. Aquí dejo lo más puro de mis esperanzas de constructor.
I leave here the purest of my hopes as a builder and the dearest of those I hold dear. I carry to new battlefronts the faith that you taught me.
En los nuevos campos de batalla llevaré la fe que me inculcaste. El espíritu revolucionario de mi pueblo, la sensación de cumplir con el más sagrado de los deberes, luchar contra el imperialismo donde quiera que esté. Esto reconforta y cura con creces cualquier desgarradura.
April 1st, 1965. Ernesto Che Guevara left for Africa. 3 weeks later, he reached the Congolese shores of Lake Tanganyika, where he met an unexpected reality. No one has the slightest idea of what a firearm is. They shoot while playing with their weapons or because of carelessness. Disagreements within the anti-government movement stopped Guevara from organizing military action. Weeks, months of inertia followed. After 7 months of almost no fighting and the frustrating impossibility of training the local soldiers, Guevara made a bitter and self-critical analysis. I learned a lot in Congo, and I left with more faith than ever in the guerrilla fight. But we failed. November 22nd, 1965. Che left Congo and secretly returned to Cuba, but his mission to liberate oppressed populations was not over. He soon decided on Bolivia. A military junta had just come to power. Clashes, protests and demonstrations were inflaming the country. The CIA thought he was in hospital in the Soviet Union. With the help of the Cuban secret services, Guevara transformed himself into a middle-class 40-year-old. He wore thick lensed glasses, he was half bald and his eyebrows were thicker. To seem shorter, he took out the insides of the heels on his shoes. With roughly 50 men, he tried to set up a training base. On November 7th, the men built a tunnel to hide provisions and materials. Instead of supporting the guerrillas, the Bolivian Communist Party launched a dissuasion campaign. The situation is not good, but a new stage of testing begins for the guerrillas, and it will do us good if we overcome it. Months passed in pursuit of and escaping from the army, which seemed to be everywhere. The comrades' losses became increasingly higher. Che was ill. He could hardly walk. He had lost about a third of his body weight. He was emaciated and famished. He was different, no longer as attentive and cautious as he used to be. August 1967. Increasingly alone, the guerrillas tried to flee northwards. They reached the mountains and apparent safety. September 1967. The town of Valle Grande, in the heart of Bolivia, became the base for the Bolivian Army's anti-guerrilla operations. Commander Guevara moved into the open with few precautions and apparently without a plan. His diary entries at this time are addressed to Aleida. They seem written by a man aware that he's marching towards his own end. The best bullet of this pistol, which has always accompanied me, the indelible memory of the children that one day you and I conceived, and the fragment of life that remains of me, I give this to the revolution. Nothing which is capable of uniting us can ever have a greater power. September 26th. The guerrillas arrived in the village of La Higuera, a piece of land between two mountains, where there were only women and children. The peasants had fled after being warned of the army's arrival. The guerrillas were ambushed by the army. 3 comrades were killed and 2 wounded. On October 7th, Commander Guevara was optimistic and wrote what was to be the last page in his diary.